Hello and welcome to Conversations with the Voice of Reason. I'm your host, Benjamin Boyce, and today's conversant is Jeremy Pollack, who is a conflict resolution, peace-building mediator type. He works with corporations to thread the needle when their employees are in conflict, and he has a bunch of different ways of getting people to get along and to recognize one another. He reached out to me, and I'm like, okay, well, I don't know anything about that. Come on board. And actually, his knowledge of human behavior is quite deep and fascinating, and it sheds a lot of light for me on how specifically people in America are interacting with each other across various different divisions. And how do we overcome those divisions? And how do we engage in fruitful, useful dialogue? I know that this is going to be very useful for a large portion of my audience base. So without further ado, here is Jeremy Pollack. I'm just going to cut in when we get interesting and then cut out when we're done and just act like a conversation. I don't know anything about mediation or coaching or peace building, so we're just going to come into it like, what the heck do you do? Yeah. And how did you start doing it? Like, that's like the first place. And is this the outgrowth of like a psychology major? Like, I'm just wondering, like, what did you study in college and how did you morph into what you're doing now?
Yeah, I started a coaching practice years ago. I came from a martial arts background, coming from very sort of a long tradition of martial arts, starting when I was like 10 years old, and eventually owned a couple of academies and had a bunch of students, and then I started coaching. I started learning how to coach through having a coach, and I just started doing personal development coaching, and that got me really interested. So I went back to graduate school. I got a master's degree in evolutionary anthropology, where I studied the evolution of cooperation and conflict, which was really interesting to me. Became a fan of all the sort of the evolutionary thinkers, and then went back to school and got a master's degree in conflict resolution and peace building. And now I'm in the sort of last year, hopefully, of my dissertation in psychology.
Oh. So, what's your dissertation on?
It's basically a link between social identity, self-efficacy beliefs, and performance and competition. So how social identity increases efficacy both at the individual and the group level, and then how that relates to performance and competitions in group competition.
So I think. Would it be wrong for me to guess that peace building is a way of leveraging conflict towards a productive end?
Peace building,
maybe rather than conflict, perhaps. Yeah,
well, my field is conflict resolution, so peace building is sort of the affirmative or the sort of positive way of thinking about it. But peace building essentially is like it encompasses a whole range or a whole field of different methodologies that are positioned to intervene in conflicts. So whether it's like an interpersonal conflict or an intergroup conflict, usually peace building is thought of as an intergroup or a large conflict transformation process that takes a long time. But the way we use it, we do it in organizations for my company, but I've been doing it for a while now between individuals, between people at work that work together, between groups that work together, and that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. So
is there essence of conflict, or like five types of conflict, or?
There are. I mean, there's lots of different theories of conflict. I tend to frame conflict through a human needs framework, which is so conflict is, the way that I look at it is a real or perceived threat to one's basic psychological or physical needs. And so when parties perceive, even if they're sort of unconscious perceptions of a threat or an impediment to one's own needs, that essentially leads to conflict. It's sort of the conflict is the emergence of that. Mm-hmm. And so,
does conflict resolution scale from the two people to Democrats and Republicans? Do the same kind of dynamics exist across that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's kind of the area that I study is talking about social this, it extrapolates out for sure to social conflict in general, because my field of study is conflict psychology. So what are the psychologies involved? What are the sort of cognitive mechanisms involved in the emergence of conflict, both at the group and the individual level? and how social identity plays into that, and that sort of thing, and then what kind of interventions could possibly work to help groups get out of conflict and into some sort of more peaceful, cooperative state with each other.
And by social identity, what do you mean? There's probably a lot in there. Right?
Yeah. So basically, any social identity is essentially the integration of a group identity into one's personal self-concept. So any kind of group identity. I mean, we all have multiple group identities, right? So like race, ethnicity, gender, nationality, etc. So so essentially, like how does social identity, study of social identity is how does the mind conceptualize those groups and integrate it into the self-concept, and in what kinds of contexts and conditions does the group identity become more salient than the personal identity? How those two things fuse together in certain ways, and that sort of thing.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on the idea that, let's just say that America cannot be unified without a common enemy? What do you think about that? Like that the only way to unify many tribes is to vilify or be against another tribe over there, like the commies or something like that.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, I would say that I'd be careful about proposing any, like, there's only one way to achieve something, So, but I would say certainly that is one way to achieve it.
Yeah.
But there's other ways to achieve it that are probably more difficult and would take more effort on everyone's part.
Like the space program or something. Even that was a competition with the Soviets in a way.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So common enemies, certainly. There's a whole literature about intergroup contact theory and what it takes to help different groups get along better when they're in conflict. And what does it mean to have contact with each other, and what kinds of contact is positive? It promotes cooperation and that sort of thing. So there's lots of ways to do it. I mean, I have different ideas and theories just based on what I know about how people should be going about getting along better.
Such as what?
Yeah, so we could definitely just
be polite.
Yeah, exactly. Be kind, be polite. I mean, it's like start on the local level, as local as you can go. And the most local you can go is with an individual. Start there, like get to know people as individuals. And then if you want to sort of expand out to that, like start to get to know local groups, like get involved with local communities. It's bizarre. It's too hard for the mind to grasp these large groups where it's like, I'm on this sort of group of 60 million people against that other group of 60 million. It just the mind does weird things in that space, and it doesn't make any sense.
Oh, that is an interesting way of going about it, because I keep on coming back ever since I started getting into Tocqueville, post-election, and I guess post whatever happened on January 6th. I'm like, okay, we have to go back to basics because this stuff is getting out of hand. And and I keep on going back. Well, where did America begin? It began as local communities, beginning their government, and scaling up. And if we have to scale down, but you're really right about the human brain's not designed to conceptualize,
of course,
millions of people.
Yeah, well, where did the human being start at the local level, right? We started in small groups, and that's kind of what our brains are designed to conceptualize. We can cooperate pretty easily in small groups. Once we get out to large groups, we need all kinds of cultural mechanisms to cooperate, and then a lot of those mechanisms break down, and we stop cooperating, and then factions form and all that sort of thing.
Well, could you run us through some of those tools within a company of what's the maximum amount of at what point does a company need to go to these more and more abstract tools, with the number of different individuals in it, like a company of 1,000 people or 130 or something like that?
If you look at the evolutionary literature, I think a lot of evolutionary anthropologists would agree that once you get beyond a group of 50 people, let's say a small tribe, basically, you need all kinds of cultural mechanisms to start making cooperation possible. In other words, to sort of hold accountable free riders or cheaters in the group, and to know who's part of the group and who isn't. So you need cultural mechanisms like dialect, different languages, belief systems, etc., to know, okay, I can trust those people. I don't know those people, so like we need that. Otherwise, if we can remember 50 people, right? But if you get beyond 50, maybe 100, 150 people up to those levels, you're going to start, you don't know everybody anymore. So now you need all kinds of mechanisms to tell your brain, who can I trust and who can I not trust, basically.
Oh, okay. And those mechanisms themselves are not as strong as the earlier mechanisms. I guess just direct contact is the strongest way of knowing, being familiar with somebody. Then there's like language, dialect. They're not as strong,
Sure.
so there's more wiggle room for distrust to enter into that, or cheating to enter into that. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, here, okay. So let me maybe we start from the beginning. This might be an interesting conversation. You tell me. The way that I think about the mind. So the mind is set up essentially. Any organism has a brain. The brain is one of the main organs that are set up, that are evolved to help the organism survive. And the brain is like a central sort of hub that helps the organism survive and reproduce in all kinds of different ways. And in the human mind, at least, and probably in lots of social animals' minds, the mind is set up to sort of create a map of the environment, both the physical and the social environment. And that map tells the organism, do you approach this object or do you avoid this object? The world is full of objects, other organisms, a chair, a hammer, etc., all kinds of objects. What do I know about the object, and do I approach or avoid? This is approach avoidance, just very basic binary sort of thinking. If we take that then and extrapolate it into like a three bucket system, three subcategories of approach avoidance, I look at it as familiar positive, familiar negative, and unfamiliar. Everything in our world gets bucketed into, this is something I know and I have a positive experience with it. This is something I know and I have a negative experience or connotation with it. And this is something I don't know about. And typically we will approach things that are positive familiar, and typically we'll avoid things that are negative familiar or defend against them. And then typically the unfamiliar stuff, depending on our personality, we either kind of approach it cautiously and try to figure out what that is. Is it a positive thing or negative, or we just kind of avoid it altogether, just to be on the safe side. So we have these buckets of approach avoidance, positive, unfamiliar, and that kind of thing. The good thing is what we're seeing now is like there's a lot of talk about implicit associations, right? Implicit biases, implicit associations. And I haven't seen any research, and I think it even says so on sort of like the implicit associations website, that there's no association right now between people's implicit associations and behavior. So like if I have a negative association with this thing, like unconsciously, it doesn't mean that I'm going to behave in a certain way necessarily. There's no relationship. There is a lot of research though that shows that you can quickly kind of override implicit associations with positive experiences. And that I think is reflected in this intergroup contact theory. So if I have a negative association with this one group, right, for instance, and I then go and I just on an individual level meet someone who I have identified as part of that group, and I have a good experience with that person. That good experience, I start to have a positive connotation with that individual, regardless of the way that I conceive of his group or her group. So I can quickly override it with an individual. And that's why I think it's so important to get to know individuals, have positive experience with people, and not just look at them as representations of sort of this abstract group that believes this thing or that's part of this thing or something like that.
That really strikes to the core of kind of a dominant method of dealing with I guess, implicit bias. I see a lot of major corporations trying to do this racial justice work or overcoming bias work. And what they're doing is separating people into their groups and then shaming one group and lifting the other group up. So the group that's being shamed, we don't have to say what group that is starting to form a negative association to to the company, and then to this other group that's being seen to be artificially lifted. So what you're saying is going explicitly against. Rather, the positive way would be to bring them all together and force them to have a good time, or kind of instigate a good time with all these groups.
Yeah. Or not focus on our different group identities, but rather focus on common group identities. Focus on common shared goals. Hey, we're all part of the same team here. Hey, we're all part of the same organization. Harvard Business Review did this interesting review of the literature on implicit bias training or implicit association training. And it was very obvious that people that are forced to do implicit bias training, it actually had a negative effect. It created more division, more anxiety about the other group and all that stuff. When people volunteer to go into that sort of training, it could have a positive effect. But those are people that are sort of pre-selecting themselves to say, I already believe this kind of thing. I just want more information about it. People that don't believe it, that don't want to participate in it, it has a negative effect. And you can see why, because no one wants to feel like, hey, I should be ashamed of who I am based on things that I didn't control, i.e. the way that I was born, right? I should, how am I supposed to be ashamed about that? Now, there's an argument on the other side that sort of like that. Well, we're not trying to shame you. We're not trying to say you should be to blame. We're just trying to highlight,
historical forces.
What's going on? Yeah, what's going on psychologically or culturally or something like that. But there's a lot of people that say, well, I don't believe that. So the question to me right now, it's like we're looking at sort of what's happening in society, and I'm not clear about the specific goals that people have in terms of here's the social changes we want. Okay, what are the actual real changes that you want, and how do you know when you get them? How do we measure whether or not those changes are being affected, and what methods are you using to affect those changes? And I think the methods right now have a problem. There's a problem in the methods. If someone says, if we say, well, we want equal opportunity for people, or we want some sort of equitable outcomes, which is a whole debate in itself about equity.
Or let's just say the value of fairness is very high.
Value of fairness,
what they want.
Yeah. So if we want the value of fairness, okay, so what does fair look like, and how are we going to achieve fairness? That's an interesting discussion, and it's worth discussing. But if we can't have that discussion, or if we can't identify actually what it looks like, how do we measure it, and how do we get there? And how effective is that method of getting there? If we don't do all those things, we're kind of shooting in the wind. And I think right now that's one of the major problems, is the methods by which we're trying to get to fairness is a problem. I'll give you an example. So using words using certain languages where a whole bunch of people have an association with the language. So if you say, if you use the word privilege, a lot of people will associate really negative, sort of self-deprecating, sort of shameful associations with the word privilege. So my question to people that use the word privilege is, if you want fairness, if that's the goal, everybody has equal opportunities, et cetera. If that's the goal, why continue to use a word that is going to provoke defensiveness? Why do that? Why not just change the language and talk about the same concepts in a different way, where it's not so triggering? If I was in a conflict resolution situation, and I knew someone was triggered by a certain word, I would do my best not to use that word, because all that's going to do is make them defensive, and I won't get anywhere. I won't have an effective communication with the person. Yeah. So methods like this, why are we using that kind of language unless the point is to provoke in some way? Unless that's the point. And if that's the point, well, that method seems to be pretty effective in provoking people.
I was going to bring that up, that if you didn't want to provoke people, then you wouldn't go around calling them racist. And then the other interpretation of that is that, well, if they go around calling everybody racist, we're fighting amongst each other, and somebody else's will is being served by getting us to not get along. So the cool thing about what you've studied and what you know is that you can take any given social issue and look at it on how do human beings achieve something together. Yeah. And critique it, or not even critique it. It's not just a critical theory that you have knowledge in it. It's the opposite of a critical theory, unification theory, or different things that get people.
That's a great way of conceptualizing it. A unification. The whole goal, the whole mission is unification in some way. Yeah. How do we get people to unify? And I do think that it has to be on an individual level. It's really tough to do it on this large scale level.
Okay. So how do we work from the individual up? So here I'll give you an example. If this is something that I talk a lot about, and it might sound frou-frou-y, but I say, like, in individual interactions, especially if we're in conflict with someone, but even if we just want to maintain peace, if we don't want to get into conflict, can we put the concept of care for each other as a priority? And it doesn't mean that we let our positions go or let our policies go or anything like that. What it just means is, in this interaction with this individual, can I just take the first 5 minutes of my interaction and just be caring? Okay. And
everybody knows how to be caring if they just drop all their other, agendas, is just to be caring. So can I care for this individual? And that means, can I listen to them? Can I get to know them a little bit? Can I understand who they are? Usually we will find a whole lot of things we can relate to people on if we just come at them without an agenda other than just, I just want to get to know this person. I just want to care for them a little bit. Yeah. So, I mean, I would start there. That the big problems that I see right now, which are concerning, are that my whole field is based in communication. It's based in order to unify and get back together and achieve something together, we have to communicate. And usually that's through dialogue, but maybe that's through some other ways of communicating. But when we have a culture that's now promoting, like, we're not willing to dialogue, either you get on board or that's it. We don't want to hear your side at all. That's sort of antithetical to the stuff that I do. And so that's what's concerning to me, is, like, how do we get back to a place where we're all willing to hear each other again?
Yeah. I keep on talking about this recently. There's this new app, it's called Clubhouse, and it's basically all these chat rooms. And what I'm seeing in this web social media app is a lot of people migrating from Facebook and Twitter onto this app, where they're now dialoguing through audio. And it's very obvious that the methods of communication on Twitter don't necessarily translate to this dialogical area, because on Twitter you can silo yourself out. You can have a lot of echo chambers. You can really put down the statement and put your flag down and, like, defend it, and then go through this whole argumentation. But in a live forum, which is real time, when that happens, the conversation reaches a breaking point, and then it's really obvious that there's certain things that end the conversation, that end communication, that stop it from going anywhere. It's that you either agree or you go away. And then that whole thing disbands, and you watch it. You can actually experience that in a very tactile way. Like, oh, that person just wanted to completely, own everybody else, and it doesn't work there, because now we're all fractured. So it's really fascinating to watch different tactics that people, myself included, have gotten used to in this more combative area of Twitter, where we don't necessarily need to care for that person. We can just care about our own tribe, or go for points in this abstracted way with likes and stuff, and it doesn't work in this other medium. So I think that bringing out and then it brings up the question of what are good communication skills? Like, why are we talking? If we want to talk towards a goal, then we have to actually focus first and foremost on, well, how do we even communicate with one another before we even get anywhere?
Yeah. Well, one thing I totally agree, and there's a whole different. I haven't studied the psychology of writing versus dialogue. But that, I'm sure that's an interesting literature, and I would imagine that when people's personalities can change and alter in certain ways, almost like a shadow self can come out through writing, because they get to hide in some way. But when you actually have a dialogue face to face, or even on the phone or something like that, there's more accountability in that dialogue, and it's. I would think that it's more reflective of your own self-image. So if I start acting like a total jerk in a dialogue, and I don't want to think of myself as a jerk, that cognitive dissonance will sort of, I think, help correct it into like, I'm not going to be such a jerk. But online, it's like there's no cognitive dissonance. It's like I can be a complete jerk online when I'm writing or something like that, but that doesn't somehow integrate into the way I think about myself. So there's got to be some, I don't know, there's got to be some interesting psychology with that. So I totally agree with that. But yeah, if we're dialoguing with each other, one thing that I sort of coach people on when we're starting to dialogue with someone who we're in conflict with, and especially if that conflict involves identity-based conflict, where this person is in some group that believes this thing and I feel threatened by that thing, and vice versa, they feel threatened by my beliefs in some way and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
It's starting to learn to have a different relationship with discomfort. So right now, let's talk about that approach avoidance category again. Anything that's painful to me, anything that's uncomfortable to me, typically I'm going to avoid it. I don't want to be uncomfortable. I don't want to be in pain. That's typical of an organism, right? Of any human beings, especially. So it's learning to start to have, because having conversations with people that have beliefs that feel like they're threatening to me is very uncomfortable, if not painful. It brings up fear, disgust, anger, all these very sort of difficult, painful emotions, uncomfortable emotions. And I have to start to learn to have a different relationship with pain in some way. This is kind of like this is something I used to talk about a lot in martial arts, is like, when you're a martial artist over time, you start to learn that pain necessarily is not something to always avoid, that you can endure a certain amount of pain. And if by enduring it, you can go into it a little bit, it actually helps you grow in some way and learn what you can handle and stuff. And so when we're in dialogue process, if the first thing I hear feels like a threat and I go, forget it, I don't want to talk to you, let's just cancel you, or let's just get away and I don't want to ever have a dialogue with you, that's not going to be helpful. That's not going to help us grow together. But if we can change that relationship with pain, and I can say, you know what, just because I'm in pain right now, just because I'm angry, just because I'm uncomfortable, just because it feels disgusting to me to hear this, that doesn't mean I should necessarily stop and avoid it and go away. Maybe I can sit with this pain a little bit. Just sit with it. Let myself feel anxious if I need to, feel disgust. And then I can continue the dialogue. And that takes a lot. It's not easy, but that's something that's important. If we're going to have dialogues with people that don't believe what we believe, and if they believe things that are threatening to us, we need to start learning to have a different relationship with that uncomfortable discomfort.
I see that. I agree with you, but also people that I disagree with are using this mindset of let's have uncomfortable conversation. You need to sit with your discomfort. And they're using that as a tool to squash people's critical faculty or to stop dissent. So it is being used to get people in line and to put people in their place. Like you only think that you only disagree with me because you're going to lose your privilege, or you are trying to not see the truth and stuff like that. So
it's a form of gaslighting.
It is a form of gaslighting, which is a term that's overused. But I think that you might have the ability to kind of really define when to listen to the voice that says something's wrong and when to say, no, it's okay that I'm uncomfortable. I can master my pain. Right? Could you? Yeah. How do you tell that difference?
It's a really great distinction that you just brought up. So when we talk about dialogue, first of all parties have to be willing to be uncomfortable to hear the other side. It's not just one side. If it's just one side needs to be uncomfortable and the other side gets to say whatever they want, that's not going to work.
There has to be symmetry. Okay.
There has to be mutuality. I mean, in terms of what I do, in terms of the work I do. The other thing is, when we go into a dialogue, the dialogue is not a debate. The purpose of the dialogue is not to convince or condemn. The purpose of the dialogue is purely to learn from each other.
Okay.
Let's learn from each other, and then from learning, what are your fears? What are the things that you're afraid of, from my side? What are the things that you want? How do you want to get those things? Both of us have that conversation, so everybody's clear on what are our goals, how do we want to get there, and what are we afraid of? And we're all aware of that. And now from there, we can start to talk about, okay, so what are some solutions we can talk about that consider both of our fears, that consider both of our goals, and both of our proposed methods? Like, that's where we need to go to. But if it's only one side and it's just like, this side is the more important side because of whatever reason, whether it's because we feel, marginalized or oppressed in some way, and so that our voices only matter because we feel oppressed. That's a difficult proposition. Now, in some cases, it might be true and it might be necessary. That's not the work that I do. Mm-hmm. That would be more like advocacy work, where we need to give power to one side because they're disempowered and that kind of thing. I'm a neutral, and so that's the work. That's where the work that I come in is like I'm only useful if everyone is willing to consider both each other's perspectives.
Yeah. Okay. I'm thinking in rough draft now, but I'm just trying to carve out the kind of conversations that I want to be involved in, where I learn things. So it starts with a sense of, one, the sovereignty of the individual is maintained, where everybody has the power over themselves and over their thoughts and over their moral agency. So judgment, in a sense, needs to be suspended. And it needs to be suspended insofar as we are traveling towards learning. So with the desire to learn from each other, we need to not judge each other. So the sovereignty of the individual leads to the agency of them to decide to agree or to disagree, so that the end goal isn't for us to have to agree in order to achieve a certain aim. So once the conversation's over, it's up to everybody to think those things over and decide if they want to pursue that goal or not. So there isn't this sense of, one thing that I see, and I don't want to make this talk too political, but one thing I see within critical social justice is that they overload the conversation with urgency. We have to act. We have to change. Therefore, we all, which is just kind of a cover for, we all have to agree in order to do something. And so my agency is taken away because it's all overloaded with urgency. So that political or that particular way of framing the conversation is something that I would just extract from the actual conversation. That could happen afterwards once we all agree. So that so that my sovereignty and my agency, my volition is maintained throughout every step of the way. So I was just banging off of what you're giving me.
No, I agree. I mean, if I were going to hold the dialogue, we would set some ground rules, and part of those ground rules would be, what is our intention? Our intention here is to learn from each other, not to convince or condemn. That's our intention. Mm-hmm. Maybe we have an intention of creating some goals that we can all agree on. Sometimes that's true, and sometimes it's just about learning from each other. Another intention would be, we are coming to this in good faith, which means we are not here to tell one another you're evil, ignorant, wrong, bad, etc. We're not here to shame each other. If that happens, this dialogue will break down. So we need to maintain those ground rules. And then, you could expand a little bit, and you could say, I'm also open to challenging my own ideas. If I hear information that seems pretty interesting or significant, and then are sort of counter to what I currently believe. Yeah. I'm open to challenging my own beliefs if I hear some information. Yeah. So and let's be able to have timeouts. Let's be able to, like, if something starts to get heated, and let's be able to have, let's time out and let's pause for a second. Let's go back to ground zero. So I think having ground rules like that and going in with that good faith intention is really important when we're having dialogues.
What are some of the things that you use when you're and feel free to anonymize this answer or make it abstract or as anecdotal as you want. But I just want to know a story of you're just dealing with impossible people, and how do you not give up?
Well, I mean, it's me giving up would look like me quitting on them by saying I can't support you anymore. So that's rarely happened. Typically what would happen first before that would be,
how do you avoid that or forestall that?
Well, so if I'm there, so my job is to care for all parties and to hold a safe space where all parties feel cared for and feel like it's safe. And they know that if things started getting heated or things aren't working out, I will step in and hold a strong sort of presence and say, we need to stop now, or we need to take a time, or we just need to come back at a later date. So they need to know that. So my job is to care for all people. And if I recognize at some point, we aren't getting anywhere, it doesn't seem like we're going to get along, I work in organizations, so it's a little easier for me to say at some point, why do you want to be in this organization anymore? Or why do you want to work with this person anymore? and go through that line of thinking. And sometimes it's like, okay, well, they actually want to separate, and my job then becomes, how do I help you peacefully separate?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
So that's different. So now but those are individuals who are only interdependent out of choice by staying in the same organization. If you look at sort of society, we are so interdependent, and we don't have any choice. And I mean, we could leave the country, but we don't. If we want to be in the country, we have to kind of get along with each other on some level. So it's harder to say, well, I'm just not going to talk to this group anymore, or not going to sort of interact with them anymore. So that's stuff. So that's just like resilience. Like, let's just keep at it. It didn't work today.
Okay.
Let's come back in a week. Let's try again.
Okay. Yeah. So a sense of patience, and it just, a lot of this boils down to just kind of being an adult, but we're at a point in our society where it's important to remind ourselves of really basic things. There's this, again, within certain formats, it's okay to go nuclear, or it kind of works to like do the mic drop. But in other formats, like, you can't actually drop the mic. You actually lose when you do the mic drop. So it phases out these, I'm not going to talk to you, or I'm really worried about talking to you because it's either my way or fascism, right? Going completely to this place where it just ends the conversation because there's no way for anybody to get along. It doesn't work out in more protracted, embodied kind of conversations or embodied dialogue situations. So it's really interesting to see. Maybe I could ask you about this. Translating your business and your work from people sitting in a room to people on webcams, has there been a difference in the quality of the communication, negative, positive, or are you able to abstract and everybody's able to just work the same in those two domains?
Well, yeah, I can only have anecdotal evidence since I, only can talk about a few.
Any thoughts you have on that, or maintaining, or watching the patterns of behavior?
Well, so one thing that I've found is there's advantages and disadvantages to going remote, to going online. So like people in organizations, so when I get called in, it's because people are typically in conflict, or they foresee conflict happening in the near future. So a lot of times when we're in an office setting and there's people that are in conflict that are working with each other, they're sort of like, they almost feel trapped, i.e. forced to be in this setting with this person they don't want to be around, or who's triggering them, or feeling like they're a threat or an impediment to them in some way. And what I saw was when they started going remote, the stress levels kind of went down because they're not around this person all day anymore. They only have to interact with them like in little bits throughout the day, and they feel protected. They're in their place of comfort, their home, which is a more powerful place for them, etc. That kind of thing. So actually, stress levels I found went down in a lot of people, and from a lower stress position, it's much easier to have an effective communication. It's much easier to start rethinking the relationship with people, to reperceive the way that you think about them and that kind of stuff. Not that people just naturally do that, but it's easier to do that. The one thing that I will say about this kind of communication, though, is we lose a little bit of the warmth, the energy. We also see like a talking face, so we don't see body posture, and sometimes body posture can tell us a lot. Sometimes body posture can feel very closed off. So like you're at a meeting with someone in a room and they're just like this or whatever. Person's not interested in me, or they're either being a jerk or something like that. But if they're just online, I don't know what's going on, so other than their face, so it might actually be advantageous. So there's kind of benefits and disadvantages to it.
There's something that you brought up about like the cumulative or the accumulated knowing of somebody, and it seems like a part of what you're able to do, or you have the skills to do, is kind of deconstruct what people think about each other in order to get to a lower level. Is that correct? And what are some of the ways in which you do that?
Yeah. I mean, the mind is set up with all kinds of interesting biases. Confirmation bias is a big one that plays into conflict. A hostile attribution bias, or what's called hostile attribution error. That's something that's found in the research, where
what's
basically, so hostile attribution error is this, or bias is this It's a filter that's placed. It's kind of related to anchoring bias. In other words, when I have some information about someone who gets placed into the negative category for me, like I have a negative interaction, like they feel threatening to me in some way, there emerges or activates like a filter, which is their bias. And through that filter now, it's a hostility filter. And everything that this person does or says now is kind of filtered through this hostile attribution bias. And now whatever they ask me, it's going to feel like a challenge, like they're trying to catch me in something, or that, they're trying to be a jerk to me or something like that. And if you looked at it objectively from just a neutral perspective, and this happens to me all the time when I'm someone that I'm coaching says, you should see what they wrote to me today. And I go, let me see. And so they show me the email, and I look at them and say, that seems very benign to me. Like they're just asking a question. How did you perceive that? And there's like, well, she's obviously trying to catch me doing something wrong. She's trying, look at it, and she's going to CC these other people because she wants to show that I didn't know. And it's just like, there's all this bias going on, all this perception. And we have to start talking about this and making you more aware of the fact that you are perceiving consistently that this person's trying to be hostile towards you, that they have negative intent towards you. That may or may not be true. But we don't know because it's all in perception right now. So are you willing to find out? Are you willing to find out what they actually meant by that, what they actually intended? And then that requires some like, okay, let's talk about this. What did you mean by that? And that becomes like sort of a process of reconciliation, almost, of like, can you reinterpret for me what you meant by that communication, whether it was an email or what you said or what you did, or can you reinterpret that behavior for me? And then can you also maybe like, and my job partly is to help people reassure each other, so it's like, this person never includes me in the meetings. They never call me and they never include me in the meetings. So, obviously they don't care about my input. They don't value me at all. And now I have this sort of bias against them, like everything they do probably is sort of negative. And, if we have a dialogue, what I might be able to get to is, can you tell us why you don't include her in those meetings? And the person could totally reinterpret it and say, I didn't even think about it. Like, I didn't know she wanted to be, if I knew she wanted to be involved in these meetings, I would have invited her. I just didn't know that. I didn't want to put that on her plate. And then to reassure, I would say, okay, so you didn't invite her, not because you didn't want her there, because you just didn't think she wanted to be there. And there was some miscommunication there. And can you tell her, do you value her? And the person, of course I value her. Yeah, that wasn't even that. Of course I value her. So I get that reinterpretation, I get that reassurance, and then that starts to break down the filter, the bias a little bit.
Yeah, the dominoes kind of.
Yeah, and you have to tell the other person, like, okay, now listen, you've heard it from her. She reinterpreted it. She told you that she does know you're valuable and she wants you to be involved. Can you start giving her the benefit of the doubt now? Can you start trusting that what she's telling you is real and true? And that's another hurdle where it's just like, I don't know. I mean, maybe she's just lying to us. Maybe she's just telling us that just to. So that's another hurdle. And it's just like this process, this like sort of long process of changing your perception to be more in line with in sort of what's actually happening. There's some lost in translation element happening here where this person has an intention, it's being lost in translation, and this person has this completely other interpretation of what the person intended.
Yeah.
That's what I find a lot of happening. I don't usually find like malicious intent. Sometimes there is, and that's when I step out and go, okay, like you guys need to have a lawyer come in if this person's like maliciously intending to harass you or something.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So there is a line. And where you've become deft at recognizing it.
If there's actual real discriminatory behavior or harassment behavior or something like that, it's like you need an advocate, not me. I'm a neutral. Like you need to call a lawyer, that kind of thing. Yeah. When I come in is like, let me help make sure that what you're perceiving is real or not real. And if it's not real, let's get some reality going here. Let's make sure that you both are clear on each other's intentions and communication.
Yeah,
that's what in my work, it's like a lot of conflict is unintentional conflict. It's this misinterpretation, miscommunication, something that this side said or this person said, for whatever reason, was interpreted in this other way by this person, and it meant all this stuff, and person didn't intend for that.
It's absolutely. I think there might be a hopeful message in what you're saying, if we go up to like I guess the taco sphere or the the mass communication sphere, social media sphere, where it might be the case that most animosity in America between Americans is completely that
unintentional
error.
conflict.
Yeah, it's like I heard that this is fascism. So I don't have to think through all this data. I can just recognize that as fascism and go, boom, okay, you're fascist, you're on the good side. And then the centrists, I'm just going to poop on you because, you don't care about the fact, well, whatever, And, I can think about reputation slander, or if you get a bad reputation, just one rumor can completely cause people to, thousands of people to filter you into this one box and not even touch you, not even look at you anymore. Right. And I personally, there was this academic paper that started to filter YouTube channels, and they put me in far right. And I specifically asked, why am I in far right? And they said, well, data that we gathered from these other things put you in this category. I'm like, I don't even know what you mean by far right. Does that mean that I'm a Nazi or that I want a king? You don't even know what that category is. Yeah. And it was weird because Sam Harris and Brett Weinstein, all these people were put into this category because of a categorical error.
Wow, that's interesting.
That happened way up the stream. And eventually there was enough pushback against this academic group that they're like, okay, there was an error in our categorization. But they didn't even consider the amount of power that just putting me in that bucket has in disconnecting me from thousands of people and causing me to not even be able to communicate because now I'm on far right, whatever that means, which could be the worst thing in the world or something very, very silly. So it's really interesting when we take what you're talking about just interpersonal relationships, not giving the benefit of the doubt or not even just having the processing power to think through everybody's position and to not just categorize these people. Because it takes time to actually care about people. It takes a heavy investment, and you're not even certain that the investment that you're putting to care into that person is going to be a waste or not, especially when we're all strangers, right? So
yeah. Well, I think you're right. I mean, I think a lot of what's happening, I do think it's potentially a hopeful message as long as we try to correct for it, that there's a lot of unintentional conflict going on. And I've experienced it personally when I start to talk to people who I don't understand their beliefs and they start to articulate them to me. Actually, I want to hear what they believe. And then I go, oh, that's not what I thought you meant by that. That's not what I understood. And, I think we're the uphill battle, if there is one. It does seem like there is one. The uphill battle is really media at this point. It's like social media and news media, because what most people on one side of a position or a political spectrum believe is being spun in certain ways to produce a narrative through media, and it gets to the other side and they go, oh, that's a threat. We can't deal with them. You know what I mean?
Those 70 million people are my enemies.
Right. It's going both ways. And the problem is when we focus on things that we see in the media, which is all about fear and threat, because that's the way they get audience. Yeah. We stop recognizing the the billions of really positive cooperative interactions that are happening every day between individuals in this country on all sides of the spectrum. We just discount the idea that I went out today and just went to the local coffee shop and met this guy, and I don't know what group he was in, but he was a different different race than me, or a different ethnicity than me. He was a different religion, obviously, than me. We had a great conversation. He's a really interesting guy. I completely discounted that because I went and watched the news about how divisive the divide is between me, and it's like there's millions and millions of really positive cooperative conversations and interactions happening every day that the news doesn't care about. Right? They only care about the things that create fear. Yeah. So again, going back to focusing on the individual, I think is important.
Yeah. I'm thinking, I was trying to formulate a question around it is definitely an uphill battle because our attention has been funneled through fear and conflict, because that's really easy for, let's just say, algorithms and the people who run all these different websites and the media companies too, it's really easy for them to meet their bottom line and to maximize their engagement through that lower feeling, like just playing with the lower brainstem. So the question is, well, how do we make this part of our brain sexy? It's something that we want to invest in.
Yeah.
And I was thinking about maybe casting it as an opportunity, like maximizing kind of like a gambling addiction or something. Like there's an opportunity of a great reward if you enter into things with good faith. Yeah. Maybe some reconditioning needs to happen where we say, you know, there's a lot that I can get out of people if I give them the benefit of the doubt, and not necessarily extract as a resource, like exploitatively, but collectively there's a lot of good oxytocin or whatever it's called and dopamine to be harvested. I'm really being very low, but I think that there's a lot of opportunity there.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of opportunity. Well, it's like if I asked you, what do you want in life? I mean, and I'm not talking about like surface level goals. I'm like, what do you want? I mean, most people really, they want to feel somewhat at peace in their life, right? They want to feel like they have a good life and they're like high level of life satisfaction. That's what they want. And if you were able to articulate, okay, listen, this way of you going, of watching media that's very fear-based and threat-based and that kind of stuff, and focusing on division and focusing on all this stuff, that's way less likely to get you to your goal of a state of feeling peaceful and feeling good about life than if you shut off the TV and you went downstairs and you talked to someone that's a little bit different from you and had a good interaction with them. And you just like cared for them for a second, listened to them, asked them about their life, found some interesting commonalities. Like if you do that regularly, you're going to achieve the goal of having a good, satisfying, peaceful life way more easily than if you just sit there and watch the TV and go, look how messed up we all are.
Yeah.
You know, and so I don't know what you're right. There needs to be some mechanism to make it sexy. So like what is the right method for that? But I found that personally, like I've shut out all media. Like I've stopped watching news. I've stopped watching. I deleted all my social media accounts except for like
podcasts
stuff. No, podcasts I love because I can selectively listen to who and what that I think is useful, right? So like, but yeah, so like, but you know, I just don't feel like it was useful or effective for me to watch the news. And that's a debatable topic. I tell people that and they go, oh, well, then you're uninformed. And you don't understand. But what are you informed about? You're informed about certain journalists' narrative about events that's spun through their own thing. And people may or may not want to believe that. But I know it for sure because I've seen it. I've witnessed it. I've seen like basically I used to be a huge fan of a particular network. And I was watching them all the time. And then I caught them red-handed in a lie where I saw for the first time, I hate to use the sort of euphemism fake news, but I saw for the first time, they actually extrapolated something out from what a politician was saying, this one little blip. And they had this 30-minute conversation about how horrible it was, about what he meant by that, what he said by that, and stuff like that. And I bought into it. And then I actually watched the clip and they completely took it out of context. And I thought, what are they talking about? How could they look at this clip and actually believe what they? And I thought that was it. And that was the end. I was like, I'm done. I can't be lied to anymore. So I just stopped. So it's like, you know, as long as people, I feel like people need to start realizing what they're watching is being filtered through other people's biases too. Yeah. It's not just legitimate, like if they were there watching it and being able to interpret it themselves, right? You know?
Yeah. Me too.
That's the uphill battle. Yeah.
May I ask you why you do this? Like, what set you on this path? Like, what's in? It sounds like there's something really deep in you that's manifesting in this. I don't know how deep you want to.
It's a good question, and I think I'll start. So I had an experience when I was young, and I've only like talked about it publicly, like maybe once. But when I was studying martial arts for a long time in my early, you know, my youth and then teenage years and stuff like that. I really loved it. And I went to college in downtown Los Angeles at USC for my undergrad. And I think it was the first month that I was there, I was actually kidnapped by a gang member. who, at 1 a.m. when I was sort of going back to my car after, coming from like a party somewhere, he came behind me with a knife and put the knife to me and made me drive him somewhere. And I had a really, amazing, frightening, sort of life-changing experience where during that car ride, and he was sort of telling me where to go, I realized that his intention was to kill me, and it was some sort of gang initiation or something. And so I was in that car, and it was a really crazy experience, because it was never before and never after had I ever gotten to the point where in my mind I was ready and willing to take a human life, because I remember thinking to myself, I will not die tonight. I will not die tonight. And my life flashed before me, and my family and stuff. It was pretty like sort of dramatic, but I didn't feel afraid. I felt very confident the whole time that I was going to survive, even if it meant that I had to fight this person and kill him, which I really didn't want to do. And so I ended up, thank God, finding a way. Once we got off the freeway, he told me to drive like way into sort of into neighborhoods that I had no idea where I was, and it was not a good neighborhood for me to be in. And we got off the freeway, and he said, go up there, and we were going up to this neighborhood that was like, it was a neighborhood. And I just knew in my gut that if I went up there, I would never come out. And I have to do this now. I have to either get out or I have to fight this individual. And I thought to myself, if I fight him and I have to kill him, it would be traumatizing for the rest of my life. I would want that image in my mind. I wouldn't want to do that. I would feel horrible about it, even though I was sort of forced to do it. So what else can I do? And I thank God I was able to take off my seatbelt without him seeing. And while I was driving, going about 35 miles an hour, I slowed down as much as I could slow down without being suspicious. And I opened the door and I just jumped out, and I was able to roll, and didn't get too hurt. I got scraped up and cut a lot, from the asphalt, but I was able to get up and run like really fast, and I got away, thank God. And in the weeks that followed, I became very sort of isolated, and actually the years that followed, I became isolated, sort of depressed. I got very much more into martial arts, like very defensive, very paranoid, and that kind of stuff. And eventually, it led me to psychology and to psychotherapy, and to trying to figure out like what, and I had to kind of get in touch with the anger that I felt, the sadness, whatever that experience had done to me as a young 18-year-old right out of suburbia, having faced a life or death situation so quickly. And that's when I started really getting interested in what is it that makes us, A, so afraid of each other, and B, aggressive towards each other, and how can we start to build better relationships with other people of different, totally, because this person was a different world from me. I'd never met anyone like him. And so how do we start to get to know people or build better relationships without having to be violent, without creating so much trauma between people, just as a very initial question. And that's when I started thinking about conflict psychology and peace. And I started studying a little bit, and then eventually it led me into graduate school and actually studying it from a sort of academic perspective. I think that's where it started on the deep level. Yeah.
Wow. Thanks for the story.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I didn't mean to reduce it to a story, but thank you for sharing.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, no, it's a crazy, I can only imagine, I mean, how people that are in law enforcement and military that have gone through similar situations, that have had to take people's lives or be in those kinds of situations, like how much, trauma they have had to experience. I saw one little blip of it,
Yeah.
So the less need for violence, and the more we can have peaceful means, so much the better for everyone's life satisfaction, well-being,
Absolutely. So you run a business. What's it called? What's your business called?
Pollack Peace Building Systems.
Peace Build Systems.
Yeah.
And what's the title of your dissertation? Does it have one? Are you allowed to say it?
I don't have a title. I don't think I have a title.
How many
yet.
colons does it have?
Probably 4 colons. I don't have a total title. Yeah, because I'm still working on the like sort of the proposal part, and so I'm about a year and a half away from probably finishing.
Okay. And do you think that there's more on top of your business that you're going to end up doing? Do you think you'll be a professor, or do you see yourself going in that direction? You're very gifted at what you do. I can tell just talking with you. So I just wonder, like, what other containers are you going to pour that into?
It depends. I'm a little bit. I have some trepidation about going into academia at this point, unless things sort of change and there's more inclusivity in academia. So I'm not sure about that, but I don't know. I really want to, continue to be like a thought leader in this space and just do what I can to promote the idea of getting to know individuals and caring for each other as a priority. Because if we put that as a priority, kindness, generosity, care, what's more important than that? In addition to our basic psychological needs, like things like autonomy and liberty. I don't know if have you read Jonathan Haidt's book, The Righteous Mind?
Yes.
Yeah. So that's an interesting. So moral foundations theory. That's a very interesting theory, and in a very simple way, the way he breaks it down, which is basically, I mean, it's more complicated than this, but basically, the way that I look at it through human needs theory is, what is your most sensitive, where's your threat perception sensitivity on particular types of needs? And it seems like if you're on one side, that your threat perception around care and equality is very high, and anything that sort of triggers that sensitivity or triggers the threat perception of everyone's not being cared for in an equal and fair way, that's really important. And then on another side, it's the sense of autonomy or liberty, and if that's being triggered, and I'm willing, and it's like, well, it seems like each side is willing to give up a little bit of one to gain the other, where I'm willing to give up a little bit of the idea of fairness in order to make sure that we are all free to choose what we want, all have agency. And that's one side. And the other side is I'm willing to give up a little bit of my liberty and my agency to regulation and et cetera, if we're all being fair and equal. And I that's an interesting way of looking at it. And I think that there's some truth to it,
Yeah. I think what you're adding to it is dialogue based on controlling or regulating that fear, or
that's
all that negative emotion.
Right. Yeah, absolutely right. So if you're going to do a dialogue, if I was going to do a dialogue, or like what we might call a transformative mediation, which is not like anything other than like a financial, legal, like a relational mediation, helping people get along better, I want to address, what are you afraid of? And if one side says, I'm really afraid that of people not being treated fairly and not being cared for and respected on a deep level, right? That's what I'm afraid of. And the other side says, well, I'm really afraid of my autonomy and agency, my liberty being jeopardized, right? And I'm willing to give up a little bit of that, So we go, okay, now we know what each other is afraid of, and we can directly address that. So, and I can ask the other party, do you intend to limit their freedom? Do you want to limit their freedom? Do you want to limit fairness? And they say, well, I don't want to limit it, but I'm willing to have it limited if my thing is, okay, so let's consider what everyone's afraid of here so that we can find some common ground to start from, so we can build solutions that actually make sense for everybody, not just one side. So we have to be clear on what each other are afraid of if we're going to build something that would work for everybody, Yeah. Otherwise, it's always like this power grab. It's like, well, who's going to be more in power so that our agenda is more important, our fears are being, addressed, and regardless of what you're afraid of, because our fears are more important than your fears. That kind of thing.
Right. Yeah. I'm watching myself being more exposed to people who adhere to ways of thinking that I've been very critical of for several years, because I've been exposed to a very awful implementation of these ideas. And in exposing myself, listening to these people talk through their ideas and listening to these ideas being debated, what I'm having to do is very consciously, look at my reaction, look at that fear, because I was used, those ideas were used to attack me. So now I'm like, okay, well, just because they start saying these words doesn't mean that it's going to escalate, and it doesn't necessarily mean that they're totally wrong. There's probably something here that I'm not seeing, or else they wouldn't be adhering to this. There's something that does drive this set of beliefs that is very likely very valid that I haven't been attending to. But first I have to like overcome that whole thing. And so it's only through exposure that I'm able to practice that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's that intergroup contact, that exposure to it. And it sounds like you're almost practicing a level of self-awareness where it's like, just because I'm perceiving something to be a threat, or just because they're perceiving something to be a threat, it doesn't mean that I need to internalize that in some way. Yeah. Believe that this is something. There's this sort of saying that's like, facts don't care about your feelings, or feelings don't care about your facts, and that kind of stuff, right? Yeah. And I think they're both true. I think that on one hand, facts. Certain facts are facts, although facts can be interpreted in all kinds of ways, right? We've seen that. It was like, I have the same set of facts here, and this person over here goes, but it doesn't mean what you think it means because of X, Y, Z. And the other person goes, no, it doesn't mean this because of X, Y, Z. So facts can be interpreted in different ways. But when we're talking about feelings, and going back even to Jonathan Haidt's sort of premise about the elephant and the rider, intuition driving decision-making and behavior, and the rider, like the sort of higher cognition, just sort of directing that intuition in some way, or even like deeper emotions. It's obvious that feelings really don't care about facts a lot of times. And that's not to say that the facts aren't important, but what's important is, how do we deal with feelings first to start getting the intuition or the elephant to start moving in a different direction, a little bit, skewing in a different direction, so that the rider's even available, the higher cognition's even open to hearing information that might otherwise it's just pure confirmation bias. I'm gonna discount anything you say if it affects my deeper beliefs, my deeper intuitions. I'm just gonna discount it. It's just not gonna matter to me.
Yeah. I think that what you're pointing to is kind of a gap in that formulation. It's that the world isn't just created of facts and feelings. The world isn't just human beings aren't just created of feelings and rationality. There's also a governing thing above both, but you have to actually practice awareness and consciousness in order to attend to the rationality and to the feelings, and then make something holistic between them. So there's this, the eye of the pyramid that I think a lot of spirituality and most likely martial arts actually gives you access to. A lot of different practices gives us access to.
If you bring us to a great point, because if you look at metaphysical or mystic traditions, Eastern philosophies, a very common theme is the idea that we are, and this is like shown in the movie The Matrix, right? We're all living in this sort of illusion, and it's true. I mean, any brain scientist will tell you, your mind is creating an illusion. It's only being able to process a certain amount of information based on the millions of bits of information that are available. So we're all in this sort of illusion, and if we can practice metacognition, or like self-awareness, like we might call in Buddhism like the witness and the ego thinking. I'm a witness to my own ego. I'm a witness to my own beliefs. I can look at it from like sort of a bird's eye view, and recognize that I'm living in an illusion, and so are we all in some level. So the question is how do I change the illusion into some way that feels really good for me? And also, like, how do we sort of combine we're all combining illusions, and it's easier when we're in the same group to combine illusions, because we can
this
share.
This is getting very postmodern, but I agree with you.
Yeah, no, but it was like
consensus reality, kind of.
Yeah, exactly.
But it's true. It's true. Yeah, you can't ignore it without consequences down the line. Yeah.
And I'm not. I mean, I don't want to promote because I'm a scientist, and I believe in the scientific method, and I don't want to say that I'm not a postmodernist in the sense like there's no sort of objective reality necessarily. Yes. Maybe if we want to look at it metaphysically, we can argue that, but there are ways of knowing what is true on some level. The way we interpret the facts can be, different, but facts are facts, and the way we interpret them can be altered. But yeah, no, I think you're right. I mean, I've been thinking about this too. Is like when I start to feel triggered, like if I watch the news or if I'm like talking to someone, I start to feel like, man, this is feeling really uncomfortable for me. One thing that's helped me is to recognize, wait a minute, I'm a little bit in my illusion right now, right? I'm living in the illusion, and in my illusion, I am perceiving that this person is threatening me, and I'm having all these thoughts about what it means to me and what it means to my future, and maybe I'm threatening, and it's like all that stuff is just potentially a story. It's not necessarily true. It could be true.
Well, yeah, when you are running on those lower emotions, you actually just become a rat in a maze. Like you actually are the field of potentiality is limited to that of an animal, of a reptile. You're actually limiting your ability, the choices that you can make, and how you can process everything. And then you're also scurrying, and so your reward is only some bit of cheese, right? Like so, like you go down to a lower level of operation.
Yeah. The limbic system, the lower level, the reptilian brain, the emotional brain, they're going to be super important to address if we want to get along. But we need to address them with a higher cognition. Like that's what makes us human, is being able to take rationale and reason and hopefully not just be directed by our intuition, but also help direct the intuition on some level. And that's tough. It's tough, It's not easy because that's not the way our brains have evolved really, but I think it's possible.
So Jeremy, you have your business, and I think you have a book. Do you have any lecture series, or I see a lot of interviews. You've done a lot of interviews, but do you have a place where people can go and suck more information out of your beautiful mind?
Well, thank you. Well, we have a YouTube channel, and we're just starting to do these sort of weekly resources of I just give these little 2-minute talks on principles of building peace in your life that I think are really important. So we just kind of launched that. So they're going to be coming out every week, little weekly tips about building more peace in your life. So that's one thing. You just search for my Pollack Peace Building on YouTube.
I'll link that.
Yeah, but also my book's called The Conflict Resolution Playbook. It's on Amazon, so get that as well. But yeah, hopefully more stuff. Hopefully more ways of interacting in the future.
I have a feeling about you. It was a very chance encounter, but now that we've spoken, I have a feeling about you. You might be Height Part 2 or Height Reloaded.
Yeah, well, that would be a compliment for sure. Yeah, appreciate it.
So I'll wrap up the call, and we can do a little bit of post call chat. So thank you for joining the Voice of Reason.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I really, really appreciate it and enjoyed it.
Cool. I'll end the recording. Congratulations for reaching the end of the discussion. If you enjoyed it, do be sure to leave a review or a comment or a thumbs up or whatever you need to do to show that glorious algorithm that this is some good stuff. And do be sure to go and check that back catalog, as it is brimming full of fantastic conversations. Links to provide monetary support are down there in the description as well. Have a good night.